The wrench slipped from my oil-stained fingers, clattering against the concrete floor of the factory basement as Charlie Morrison's voice echoed down through the industrial ventilation system above. I pressed myself against the cold machinery housing, 20 feet below the executive offices of Morrison Steelworks, heart-pounding as his words cut through the mechanical hum with terrifying clarity. "The press machine malfunction on Friday will be perfect, Stan." Charlie's voice carried that same authoritative tone he used during safety meetings. "One faulty sensor, maybe a delayed emergency stop, and it'll look completely accidental. The insurance will cover everything, and by then, production delays will be blamed on the tragedy." Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Stan Rodriguez's nervous laugh made my stomach drop. The same man who'd been our head of maintenance for 15 years, who'd trained me on equipment safety protocols when I first started as a junior engineer. "You sure about the timing, boss? The life insurance policy on Evelyn is barely 18 months old. Won't that raise flags?" "Trust me, I've done the research," Charlie replied with the casual confidence that had built Morrison Steelworks into one of Ohio's largest metal fabrication companies. After the first year, they rarely investigate unless there's obvious foul play. Evelyn's always been accident-prone anyway. Everyone saw her slip on that oil spill last month. Perfect setup. My legs buckled, and I sank against the humming generator that powered the main production floor. The same production floor where I'd worked 60-hour weeks for the past year and a half, believing I was building my career in industrial engineering. The same factory where Charlie Morrison had built his reputation as Toledo's most innovative manufacturer, the man who'd taken a struggling family business and transformed it into a multi-million-dollar operation. The irony of my hiding spot wasn't lost on me. I'd come down to the basement to conduct what I thought was a routine inspection of the new hydraulic systems, part of my responsibilities as the facility's junior safety engineer. Instead, I'd stumbled into my boss casually planning my murder with the same methodical precision he used to plan production schedules. What Charlie didn't realize as he plotted my death in the executive offices 3 floors above was that his accident-prone junior engineer had spent the last 8 years as an undercover corporate investigator for the Department of Labor. The same analytical skills that had exposed safety violations and worker exploitation across the Midwest were about to become his worst nightmare. But that revelation would come later. Right now, all I could do was listen in horror as the 2 men I'd trusted with my daily safety discussed the exact method they planned to use to kill me. "The press machine incident needs to look like operator error," Charlie continued, his voice taking on the clinical tone he used when discussing quarterly projections. "Evelyn's been working late shifts all week on the Henderson contract. Friday evening skeleton crew, minimal witnesses. Stan, you'll disable the light curtain safety system around 6 p.m., make it look like a gradual malfunction rather than sudden failure." "What about the emergency stop buttons?" Stan asked, and I could hear papers rustling, probably safety schematics spread across Charlie's mahogany desk. "Delayed response, rig them to have a 3-second lag, long enough for the press to complete its cycle if someone gets caught inside the work envelope. We'll blame it on hydraulic pressure buildup, happens all the time with older equipment." The casual way they discussed my impending death, as if I were just another piece of machinery to be replaced, made my hands shake uncontrollably. These weren't strangers planning violence. These were men I'd shared coffee with every morning. Men whose families I'd met at company barbecues, men who'd congratulated me on my promotion to safety engineer just 6 months ago. The beauty of industrial accidents, Charlie's voice grew more animated, like he was warming to his favorite subject, is that they're inherently believable. Manufacturing is dangerous work. OSHA expects a certain number of incidents. As long as we follow proper reporting procedures and express appropriate concern for workplace safety, no one questions the narrative. Stan's response chilled me to the bone. Just like the Birmingham plant incident last year. Similar setup, similar results. Insurance paid out within 60 days, and the family never questioned the safety report. Birmingham plant. My mind raced through everything I knew about Morrison Steelworks' expansion across the Midwest. Charlie had acquired 3 smaller facilities over the past 2 years, each purchase preceded by what the industry trade publications had described as tragic workplace accidents that created urgent sale conditions. I'd assumed it was coincidental. The manufacturing sector was notorious for safety incidents, especially in older facilities with outdated equipment. Now I realized I'd been witnessing a pattern, not coincidences. Charlie Morrison wasn't just planning my murder. He was a serial killer who'd been systematically eliminating obstacles to his corporate expansion, disguising murders as industrial accidents while collecting insurance payouts and acquiring companies at distressed prices. "What about Evelyn's investigation work?" Stan asked, and my blood ran cold. "She's been asking a lot of questions about the safety upgrades budget. What if she's documented things that could cause problems later?" Charlie's laugh was devoid of warmth. "That's exactly why she needs to go, Stan. Evelyn's too thorough, too detail-oriented. She's starting to notice patterns in our safety reports that could expose the whole operation. Better to eliminate the problem before it becomes a federal investigation." The conversation continued, but I'd heard enough to understand that my death wasn't just about insurance money. It was about covering up years of systematic murder disguised as workplace safety failures. My background in corporate investigation had made me a threat to Charlie's operation, even though I'd been working undercover and hadn't yet connected the dots he was worried about. As footsteps echoed above me, indicating the meeting was ending, I forced myself to remain motionless against the generator housing. My mind was already racing through everything I'd observed during my 18 months at Morrison Steelworks: the unusually high number of equipment malfunctions during shift changes, the pattern of safety system failures that always seemed to affect specific workers, the way Charlie always insisted on personally conducting accident investigations. I'd been gathering evidence of OSHA violations and worker safety issues, never suspecting that the violations were intentional, designed to create plausible cover for premeditated murder. Every safety report I'd written, every equipment inspection I'd conducted, every worker interview I'd documented had been building a case against Charlie Morrison without my realizing it. But Charlie had made one critical error in his planning. He'd underestimated the woman he'd hired as his safety engineer. The real Evelyn Parker had spent her career unraveling corporate conspiracies far more sophisticated than his amateur murder scheme, and she was about to disappear from his sight while systematically dismantling everything he'd built on blood and lies. By Friday evening, Charlie Morrison expected to be explaining my tragic death to OSHA investigators and insurance adjusters. Instead, he was going to discover that his carefully planned accident had become the catalyst for his complete destruction. The prey was about to become the predator, and Charlie had no idea what kind of hunter he'd been trying to kill. The conversation above me shifted into horrifying specificity as Charlie began outlining the exact mechanics of my planned death. I could hear chair wheels rolling across the hardwood floor of his office, probably moving to his wall-mounted factory blueprints where he'd traced out every detail of the kill zone. "The Henderson contract requires Evelyn to run quality checks on the new titanium components Friday evening," Charlie explained, his voice carrying the satisfaction of a man who'd planned every angle. "She'll be alone in Section C, running material samples through the hydraulic press. That's our window." Stan's voice sounded strained, as if he was finally grasping the full weight of what they were planning. "Walk me through the technical setup again, boss. I need to make sure there's no way this traces back to deliberate sabotage." "The press operates on a programmable logic controller," Charlie replied, slipping into the technical jargon that had made him a respected figure in industrial automation. "During normal operation, the light curtain creates an invisible safety barrier around the work envelope. If anything breaks that beam, a hand, a tool, even a shadow, the press stops immediately." I pressed closer to the ventilation grate, my engineering background allowing me to follow their technical discussion with growing horror. Charlie was describing a sophisticated murder weapon disguised as a safety malfunction. "Friday afternoon, you'll access the PLC programming through the maintenance terminal," Charlie continued. "Modify the safety interlock logic to introduce a delay. Instead of immediate shutdown, program a 3-second lag between light curtain activation and press stoppage. Make it look like a gradual system degradation, the kind of thing that happens when hydraulic pressure builds up over time." "What about the emergency stop circuits?" Stan asked. "Evelyn knows those systems inside and out. If she notices anything wrong with the safety responses, she won't have time to notice." Charlie's voice turned cold. "The press cycle takes exactly 4 seconds from activation to full compression. With the safety system compromised, if she reaches into the work envelope to adjust a sample positioning, which the Henderson contract specifications require, she'll be caught in the mechanism before the delayed stop command can execute." The casual precision with which Charlie described my impending death made bile rise in my throat. This wasn't a crime of passion or desperation. It was a carefully engineered murder disguised as industrial negligence. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Every detail had been calculated to ensure maximum lethality while maintaining plausible deniability. The beauty of this method, Charlie continued, warming to his subject like a professor explaining a favorite theorem, is that crushed limbs and torso trauma are consistent with press machine accidents. The coroner will find exactly what we'd expect from someone who got caught in heavy machinery. No unexplained injuries, no defensive wounds, nothing that suggests foul play. Stan's nervous clearing of his throat indicated he wasn't sharing Charlie's enthusiasm for the technical details. What about the timeline? Won't it seem suspicious that the safety systems just happened to malfunction when Evelyn was working alone? That's why Friday evening is perfect, Charlie replied, and I could hear papers shuffling, probably incident reports or safety documentation. The Henderson contract has been running behind schedule all week. Evelyn's been pulling overtime trying to meet the Monday delivery deadline. It's completely normal for her to be working late, especially on critical quality control checks. My mind reeled as I realized how long Charlie had been planning this. The Henderson contract wasn't just a convenient cover story, it was a trap he'd been building for weeks. Every late evening I'd spent in Section C, every quality control protocol I'd followed, every safety procedure I'd meticulously documented, had been setting up the conditions for my own murder. Plus, Charlie added with disturbing satisfaction, Evelyn's accident last month with the oil spill establishes a pattern of workplace incidents. The insurance investigators will see a safety-conscious employee who unfortunately became overconfident around dangerous machinery. These things happen all the time in manufacturing. The oil spill incident, I remembered it clearly, slipping on hydraulic fluid that someone had failed to clean up properly near the main assembly line. At the time, I'd chalked it up to typical industrial housekeeping issues. Now I realized it had been a deliberate setup, creating documented evidence of my supposed clumsiness for future reference. What about witnesses? Stan pressed. The night shift supervisor, the security guard. Tony Kellerman's been instructed to conduct his Section C safety walkthrough at 8 p.m. sharp, Charlie replied. By then the incident will be over, and he'll discover the scene exactly as we need it found. Tony's a good company man. He'll follow proper emergency protocols without asking inconvenient questions. Tony Kellerman. I'd worked with him dozens of times during evening shifts. He was a decent man, a grandfather who'd been with Morrison Steelworks for over 20 years. Charlie was planning to traumatize Tony by making him discover my body, probably calculating that Tony's emotional reaction would add authenticity to the accident scene. The response timeline is crucial, Charlie continued. Tony discovers the incident at 8 p.m., calls 911, and the emergency response begins. By 8:30, we'll have paramedics, police, and OSHA investigators on scene. Everything will be chaos, exactly the kind of environment where accident scenes get contaminated and evidence gets compromised. Stan's voice carried a note of grudging admiration mixed with revulsion. You've really thought this through, haven't you? I've had to, Charlie replied, his tone shifting to something darker. Evelyn's been getting too close to patterns she shouldn't be seeing. Last week she asked about the correlation between safety system upgrades and our recent facility acquisitions. She's starting to connect dots that could bring down everything we've built. The pieces were falling into place with terrifying clarity. My legitimate investigation into OSHA compliance had inadvertently stumbled onto Charlie's murder operation. My background in corporate investigation had given me the analytical skills to recognize patterns that a typical safety engineer might miss. In trying to do my job well, I'd signed my own death warrant. What about after? Stan asked quietly. The investigation, the insurance claims. Standard procedure, Charlie replied with businessman-like efficiency. OSHA will conduct their investigation, find evidence of gradual safety system failure, and issue citations for inadequate maintenance protocols. Morrison Steelworks will pay the fines, implement new safety procedures, and express deep regret for the tragic loss of a valued employee. The insurance company will process Evelyn's life insurance claim within 60 days. And the Henderson contract? We'll blame the production delays on the tragic accident, negotiate an extension, and ultimately deliver a few weeks late. The client will be understanding given the circumstances. Meanwhile, the insurance payout will more than cover any penalty costs. Charlie had turned my death into a profit center, calculating exactly how much money he'd make from murdering me while maintaining his reputation as a safety-conscious employer. The cold-blooded nature of his planning revealed a mind that viewed human life as just another business expense to be managed and optimized. As their conversation began to wind down, I realized I'd been holding my breath for so long that my chest ached. Friday evening was only 3 days away. Charlie had given me a timeline for my own murder, and now I had less than 72 hours to figure out how to turn his perfect plan into his complete destruction. But what Charlie Morrison didn't know, as he finalized the details of what he thought would be the perfect industrial accident, was that he'd made a catastrophic error in target selection. The woman he was planning to kill wasn't just Evelyn Parker, junior safety engineer with a tendency toward workplace accidents. She was Special Agent Evelyn Parker, 8-year veteran of the Department of Labor's Office of Inspector General, specializing in undercover investigations of corporate safety violations and worker exploitation. For the past 18 months, I'd been living a carefully constructed fiction. My credentials as a safety engineer were real. I'd earned my industrial engineering degree from Ohio State specifically to support deep cover assignments in manufacturing environments. My work history at Morrison Steelworks was authentic, my knowledge of safety protocols genuine, my concerns about OSHA compliance completely legitimate. But underneath the junior engineer persona was a federal investigator who'd spent years unraveling corporate conspiracies far more sophisticated than Charlie's amateur murder scheme. The irony was almost laughable. Charlie was planning to kill me because my investigative skills had made me a threat to his operation, never realizing that those same skills came from 8 years of federal law enforcement training. He'd been worried about a safety engineer asking too many questions, completely unaware that he'd hired a federal agent specifically trained to expose exactly the kind of crimes he'd been committing. My assignment at Morrison Steelworks had begun with a routine tip from a Department of Labor whistleblower hotline. A former employee had reported suspicious patterns in workplace accident rates across Morrison's newly acquired facilities. The initial allegations had focused on deliberate safety violations to cut costs and boost profit margins, standard corporate malfeasance that fell well within my area of expertise. I'd expected to document some OSHA violations, maybe uncover systematic corner-cutting on safety equipment or worker training. Instead, I'd stumbled into what appeared to be a serial killing operation disguised as industrial accidents. The scope of Charlie's crimes had far exceeded anything in my briefing materials. The Department of Labor had sent me in as Evelyn Parker, recent engineering graduate looking for her first real job in industrial safety. My background had been meticulously crafted, authentic degree transcripts, verifiable work history with smaller manufacturing companies, even carefully curated social media presence dating back years. Charlie's HR department had never suspected they were hiring a federal investigator. My handler, Supervisory Special Agent Louisa Hendricks, believed I was conducting a straightforward safety compliance investigation. Our monthly check-ins had focused on documentation of code violations and evidence of systematic corner cutting. I'd reported my concerns about unusual accident patterns, but we'd assumed it reflected negligence rather than premeditated murder. Now I realized that Louisa needed to know immediately that we weren't dealing with corporate safety violations, we were looking at a multi-state serial killing operation using industrial accidents as cover. But contacting my handler would require breaking cover, and with Charlie planning my murder for Friday evening, I couldn't risk any deviation from my established patterns that might alert him to my true identity. The skills that had made me valuable to the Department of Labor were about to become my survival tools. 8 years of undercover work had taught me to think strategically under pressure, to document evidence meticulously, and to build cases that could survive the most aggressive legal challenges. More importantly, I'd learned to turn suspects' own criminal behavior against them, using their confidence and arrogance as weaknesses to exploit. Charlie Morrison thought he was dealing with a junior engineer who'd accidentally stumbled onto his operation. In reality, he was facing a federal investigator who specialized in exactly this type of corporate conspiracy. Every conversation I'd had with him, every safety report I'd written, every concern I'd raised about accident patterns had been building a federal case file without his knowledge. My training had taught me to recognize the telltale signs of corporate crime that Charlie apparently thought were invisible. The unusual clustering of accidents around facility acquisitions, the consistent patterns in safety system failures, the way insurance claims moved through the system faster than industry averages suggested. All of it had been raising red flags in my investigative instincts for months, but I'd been approaching it as corporate negligence rather than premeditated murder. Charlie's conversation with Stan had revealed that I'd been underestimating the scope and sophistication of his operation. This wasn't just about cutting safety corners to save money. This was about systematically eliminating witnesses and obstacles while collecting insurance payouts and acquiring distressed companies. The federal government had unknowingly sent an undercover agent directly into the hands of a serial killer. If Charlie's plan succeeded, the Department of Labor would lose an experienced investigator and never know that their routine safety compliance investigation had actually uncovered a multi-state murder conspiracy. But Charlie had made one critical miscalculation. He'd spent months planning my death based on his assessment of me as a naive junior engineer. He'd never bothered to dig deeper into my background, never questioned why someone with my analytical skills and attention to detail had ended up at a mid-sized steel fabrication plant in Toledo, Ohio. My real identity was my strongest weapon. While Charlie prepared to eliminate what he thought was a troublesome employee, I would be deploying 8 years of federal law enforcement training against him. He expected to face someone who would panic and make mistakes under pressure. Instead, he would be confronting an investigator who'd been trained to function effectively in exactly these situations. The Department of Labor had provided me with resources that Charlie couldn't imagine. Secure communication channels that bypassed normal phone and internet systems, access to federal databases that could trace his activities across state lines, coordination capabilities with other federal agencies that could mount simultaneous operations across multiple jurisdictions. More importantly, my training had taught me to think like the criminals I investigated. I understood how people like Charlie operated, what motivated them, where they made mistakes. Charlie had revealed his entire operation during his conversation with Stan, probably because he felt safe discussing it in his private office. He had no idea that his moment of criminal overconfidence had just provided a federal investigator with everything she needed to destroy him. Charlie Morrison was about to discover that his carefully planned industrial accident had become something entirely different. Instead of eliminating a troublesome employee, he was going to trigger a federal investigation that would expose his entire network and send him to prison for multiple counts of premeditated murder. The hunter had just revealed himself to his prey, not realizing that the prey was actually a predator in disguise. I remained motionless against the generator housing for what felt like hours, though the digital clock on the maintenance panel showed only 45 minutes had passed since my world had completely imploded. Charlie's voice had faded as he and Stan moved toward the executive elevator, probably heading to lunch at the country club where Charlie conducted most of his important business dealings. The silence in the basement felt oppressive after the horror of their conversation. The mechanical humming of industrial equipment that had always been comforting background noise now seemed ominous, as if the entire factory had been transformed into an elaborate murder weapon designed specifically for my destruction. My legs were shaking as I finally pulled myself to my feet, using the generator housing for support. The weight of what I'd discovered pressed down on me like the hydraulic press Charlie planned to use for my execution. This wasn't just about my own survival anymore. It was about 18 months of living a lie with a man who'd been planning my death probably since the day he hired me. The betrayal cut deeper than I'd expected. For a year and a half, I'd shared coffee with Charlie every morning in the employee break room. I'd listened to him talk about his concerns for worker safety, his pride in Morrison Steelworks' improving accident statistics, his plans to expand the company while maintaining the family business culture that his father had established. I genuinely respected his apparent commitment to both profitability and worker welfare. Now I understood that every conversation had been a performance. When Charlie expressed concern about workplace safety, he was actually calculating which accidents would be most profitable to arrange. When he discussed expansion plans, he was identifying new facilities to acquire through strategically planned tragedies. When he talked about maintaining family business values, he was describing his approach to systematically murdering anyone who threatened his operations. The most disturbing realization was how completely I'd been fooled. My federal training had taught me to recognize deception, to identify the behavioral patterns that indicated criminal activity, to spot the inconsistencies that revealed when someone was living a double life. But Charlie had been so convincing in his role as the safety-conscious business owner that I'd never suspected the depth of his deception. Part of the problem was that Charlie's public persona wasn't entirely fake. He genuinely was a brilliant businessman who'd transformed Morrison Steelworks from a struggling family operation into a multi-million-dollar enterprise. His understanding of industrial processes and safety systems was authentic and comprehensive. His reputation in the manufacturing community was built on real achievements and legitimate expertise. But underneath that successful businessman was a sociopath who'd learned to weaponize his knowledge and reputation for murder. Charlie had taken everything that made him effective in legitimate business, strategic planning, attention to detail, understanding of regulatory systems, and applied those skills to creating the perfect killing machine disguised as normal industrial operations. I thought back to the dozens of interactions I'd had with Charlie over the past 18 months, searching for signs I should have noticed. The way he always insisted on personally reviewing accident reports, claiming it was part of his hands-on management style, his unusual interest in employee life insurance policies, which he explained as concern for worker families, the frequency with which he visited other manufacturing facilities, supposedly to study best practices, but probably to identify potential targets. Most telling, in retrospect, was Charlie's reaction whenever I raised questions about safety patterns or statistical anomalies. He'd always been supportive and encouraging, praising my analytical thinking while subtly steering my investigations away from areas that might reveal his true activities. I'd interpreted his guidance as mentorship from an experienced executive. Now I realized he'd been carefully managing my access to information that could expose his crimes. The personal betrayal was compounded by professional humiliation. I was a federal investigator who'd been completely manipulated by the subject of my investigation. Charlie had been playing me like a chess piece, using my own conscientiousness and dedication to worker safety as tools to further his criminal objectives. Every safety report I'd written, every process improvement I'd suggested, every concern I'd raised had been feeding information to a serial killer who was using it to refine his murder techniques. Even my living situation had been part of Charlie's deception. He'd helped me find my apartment in downtown Toledo, recommending a building owned by one of his business associates. He'd suggested the neighborhood restaurants where I ate dinner, the gym where I worked out, the coffee shop where I met friends. I'd thought he was being helpful to a new employee trying to establish herself in an unfamiliar city. Now I wondered if he'd been positioning me for easier surveillance and control. The apartment itself suddenly felt contaminated. How many times had Charlie been there under some pretense? He'd helped me move furniture when I first arrived. He'd stopped by to drop off work documents when I was sick with the flu. He'd attended a housewarming party I'd thrown for my Morrison Steelworks colleagues. Each visit had probably been an opportunity to study my routines, my habits, my vulnerabilities. My social life at Morrison Steelworks had been carefully curated by Charlie's influence, I now realized. The colleagues he'd introduced me to, the company events he'd encouraged me to attend, the professional development opportunities he'd recommended, all of it had been designed to keep me isolated within a social circle he could monitor and control. The most chilling thought was how long Charlie had been planning this. The conversation I'd overheard suggested that my murder was the culmination of months of preparation, but I suspected the timeline might be even longer. Had Charlie identified me as a potential threat from my first day on the job? Had my hiring been part of an elaborate setup to bring a perceived enemy within killing range? My federal training had taught me that successful criminals often displayed sophisticated psychological manipulation skills, but Charlie's level of deception was extraordinary even by those standards. He'd created a complete alternate reality where he was the mentoring boss, and I was the promising employee, all while systematically planning my death with the casual efficiency of a production schedule. The emotional impact was devastating, but I couldn't afford to be paralyzed by betrayal and self-recrimination. Charlie had made one crucial error in his planning. He'd revealed his intentions before executing them. That gave me a window of opportunity that his previous victims had never possessed. I knew exactly what was coming and when it was supposed to happen. More importantly, Charlie had no idea that his confession had been overheard by someone with the skills and resources to turn his perfect plan into his complete destruction. While he was probably enjoying lunch at the country club, celebrating the imminent success of his latest murder, I was already beginning to plan his downfall. But first I needed to process the full scope of what I'd stumbled into. As I made my way carefully through the basement machinery toward the service elevator, my mind was racing through 18 months of observations that suddenly took on sinister new meaning. Every seemingly innocent detail now revealed itself as part of a pattern I should have recognized much earlier. The signs had been there from my first week at Morrison Steelworks, subtle but persistent like hairline fractures in a foundation that eventually bring down the entire structure. Charlie's unusual hands-on approach to safety incident investigations, which I'd initially admired as evidence of genuine leadership commitment. His insistence on personally reviewing all accident reports before they were filed with OSHA, claiming he wanted to ensure accuracy and completeness. Now I understood that Charlie's personal involvement wasn't about quality control, it was about controlling the narrative. Every accident report that crossed his desk was being edited and sanitized to remove any evidence of deliberate sabotage or systematic safety violations. He'd been covering his tracks while simultaneously gathering intelligence on which employees might pose future threats to his operation. The employee turnover patterns that had puzzled me suddenly made perfect sense. Morrison Steel Works had an unusually high rate of experienced workers leaving for better opportunities at other companies, always shortly after they'd raised concerns about safety protocols or equipment maintenance. I'd attributed it to the competitive job market in manufacturing, assuming that experienced workers were simply following higher salaries elsewhere. But Charlie's conversation with Stan had revealed the truth. Workers who asked too many questions or noticed too many problems didn't get better job offers, they got workplace accidents. The ones who survived the accidents suddenly became very quiet about safety concerns, probably understanding instinctively that their survival depended on not noticing anything unusual. Those who didn't survive became cautionary tales that kept other employees from asking inconvenient questions. The Birmingham plant acquisition that Stan had mentioned was particularly telling. I'd reviewed the public records when Morrison Steel Works announced the purchase, impressed by Charlie's business acumen in identifying undervalued assets. The facility had been struggling financially after a tragic workplace accident that killed their most experienced safety engineer and resulted in massive OSHA fines and insurance settlements. At the time, I'd seen it as a savvy business move, acquiring a distressed company at below market value and turning it around through better management and safety improvements. Now I realized it was something far more sinister. Charlie hadn't just identified an undervalued asset, he'd created the conditions that made it undervalued by murdering the safety engineer who might have exposed whatever violations Charlie needed to implement his own operational changes. The pattern extended beyond individual facilities to Charlie's broader expansion strategy. Over the past 3 years, Morrison Steel Works had acquired 6 smaller manufacturing companies across Ohio, Michigan, and Pennsylvania. In each case, the acquisition had been preceded by workplace tragedies that created urgent financial pressures for the target companies. I'd actually researched several of these acquisitions during my first months at Morrison Steel Works, thinking that understanding Charlie's growth strategy would help me better serve the company's safety compliance needs. The pattern had seemed impressive. Charlie consistently identified companies that were about to face major problems and acquired them just before their troubles became public knowledge. What I'd interpreted as exceptional business intelligence was actually evidence of premeditated murder. Charlie wasn't predicting which companies would face problems, he was creating the problems by eliminating key personnel who posed obstacles to his plans. Safety engineers, union representatives, quality control managers, even accounting staff who might notice financial irregularities, all of them had been systematically eliminated through carefully planned accidents. The most chilling realization was how methodical Charlie's approach had been. Each acquisition followed the same pattern: identify a target company with valuable assets but vulnerable operations, place someone inside to gather intelligence on key personnel and safety systems, eliminate the biggest threats through workplace accidents, then swoop in with acquisition offers before the companies could recover from their losses. My own hiring suddenly looked very different in this context. I'd been recruited for Morrison Steel Works through a headhunting firm that specialized in placing safety engineers in manufacturing environments. Charlie had specifically requested someone with my background in safety compliance and statistical analysis. At the time, I'd been flattered by his interest in my analytical skills and attention to detail. Now I understood that Charlie had been recruiting his next victim. He'd specifically sought out a safety engineer with the skills to potentially uncover his operation, probably planning to eliminate me before I could become a real threat. My federal background had made me even more dangerous than he'd realized, but it had also given me the tools to recognize what he was doing once I knew to look for it. The equipment maintenance schedules that had troubled me for months now revealed their true purpose. Stan's maintenance logs showed patterns of safety system testing that coincided suspiciously with periods when specific employees were working alone in areas with high-risk machinery. I'd noticed the correlation during routine safety audits, but I'd assumed it reflected poor coordination between maintenance and production scheduling. Charlie and Stan had been deliberately creating windows of vulnerability, timing safety system maintenance to coincide with opportunities to eliminate troublesome employees. The press machine that was supposed to kill me on Friday evening had probably been used to murder other people who'd gotten too close to understanding Charlie's operation. Even the Henderson contract that provided cover for my planned murder fit the pattern. I'd been assigned to the quality control work because of my engineering background and attention to detail, exactly the skills that made me dangerous to Charlie's operation. He'd created a legitimate business justification for placing me alone in Section C during evening hours, when witnesses would be minimal. The oil spill incident that was supposed to establish my pattern of workplace clumsiness hadn't been an accident either. Someone had deliberately spilled hydraulic fluid in an area where I regularly walked, timing it for a moment, when I'd be carrying equipment that would make a fall more likely. Charlie had been building documentation to support his eventual murder plan for months. My federal training had taught me to recognize criminal patterns, but Charlie's operation had been sophisticated enough to disguise itself as normal business activities and unfortunate coincidences. Only now, with the context provided by his conversation with Stan, could I see the systematic nature of what he'd been doing. Charlie Morrison wasn't just a serial killer. He was a criminal mastermind who'd figured out how to turn industrial accidents into the perfect murder weapon. He'd weaponized the entire manufacturing industry's acceptance of workplace hazards as inevitable, using that cultural blindness to hide systematic murder behind statistical noise. But Charlie had made one critical error. In his arrogance, he'd revealed his entire operation to someone with the exact skills needed to expose it. As I reached the main floor of the factory and began walking toward my temporary office in the engineering department, my mind was already shifting from victim to investigator. I had less than 3 days to build a case that would not only save my life, but bring down Charlie's entire network. My first priority was documenting everything I'd overheard. Federal investigations live or die on the quality of evidence, and eyewitness testimony alone wouldn't be sufficient to convict someone of Charlie's intelligence and resources. I needed corroborating evidence, financial records, communication logs, and preferably recordings of Charlie's criminal planning in his own voice. The engineering office was empty during the lunch hour, giving me privacy to begin my work. I pulled out the encrypted smartphone that the Department of Labor had provided for my undercover assignment. A device that looked like a standard consumer phone but contained secure communication software and sophisticated recording capabilities that were invisible to standard detection equipment. My fingers were still shaking slightly as I typed my initial incident report, using the coded language that would alert my handler to the urgency of the situation without revealing sensitive details if the communication was intercepted. The message was simple but would convey everything Louisa needed to know. Pattern confirmed. Multiple facilities. Timeline accelerated. Request immediate backup authorization. Within 15 minutes, my phone buzzed with a response that appeared to be a routine text from a friend, but actually contained coded instructions. Louisa had authorized me to proceed with advanced evidence-gathering techniques and would begin coordinating with other federal agencies for a potential multi-jurisdictional operation. More importantly, she was activating emergency protocols that would provide me with backup and extraction options if Charlie's timeline accelerated beyond Friday evening. With federal support confirmed, I began the systematic evidence collection that would form the foundation of the case against Charlie. My position as safety engineer gave me legitimate access to most areas of the facility, including maintenance records, equipment logs, and incident reports going back several years. Charlie had been careful to control the information in these files, but he couldn't eliminate everything without creating suspicious gaps. The maintenance logs were my first target. Stan's records showed patterns of safety system testing and calibration that coincided with specific dates and times. When I cross-referenced these patterns with employee schedules and incident reports, a chilling picture emerged. Every accidental death or serious injury at Morrison Steelworks had been preceded by maintenance work that temporarily disabled or delayed the safety systems designed to prevent exactly those types of accidents. But the correlation was subtle enough that it wouldn't be obvious to casual review. Charlie and Stan had been careful to spread the pattern across multiple systems and timeframes, ensuring that no single incident would trigger automatic red flags in OSHA databases or insurance company algorithms. Only someone specifically looking for the pattern with access to comprehensive maintenance records would be able to see it. I photographed every relevant page using my phone's covert documentation features, building a digital evidence file that would demonstrate the systematic nature of the safety violations. The timestamps on the maintenance records would prove that Charlie and Stan had been deliberately creating windows of vulnerability for specific employees on specific dates. The personnel files were equally revealing. Charlie's hiring patterns showed a clear preference for safety engineers and quality control managers, with strong analytical backgrounds, exactly the type of people who might eventually notice the patterns in accident data. But their tenure at Morrison Steelworks was consistently short, ending either with workplace accidents or sudden departures for better opportunities that I was beginning to suspect were either fictional or coerced. My own hiring file contained notes in Charlie's handwriting that were now obviously sinister. Comments about my exceptional attention to detail and strong pattern recognition skills weren't praise for valuable employee qualities, they were documentation of the specific threats I posed to his operation. Charlie had hired me specifically because my skills made me dangerous, planning to eliminate me before I could become a real problem. The equipment inspection records provided another layer of evidence. The hydraulic press that was supposed to kill me Friday evening had a maintenance history that suggested systematic tampering disguised as routine service. Critical safety components had been upgraded or recalibrated multiple times over the past year, always by Stan during periods when the equipment was scheduled for use by employees who'd later suffered accidents or suddenly left the company. More damning was the pattern of replacement parts orders. Components that should have lasted years were being replaced monthly, suggesting that Stan was systematically installing defective or modified parts designed to fail at specific times. The procurement records showed orders for safety sensors, emergency stop switches, and pressure relief valves that were either non-standard specifications or modified versions of standard components. I spent 2 hours building a comprehensive digital evidence file, photographing hundreds of pages of maintenance logs, personnel files, equipment records, and procurement documents. The pattern was so clear that a federal prosecutor would have no difficulty demonstrating Charlie's systematic approach to murder disguised as workplace safety failures. But documentation of past crimes wasn't enough. I needed evidence of the specific plot against me, preferably recordings of Charlie and Stan discussing their Friday evening plan. My federal training had taught me that criminals often grew overconfident when they believed they were safe from surveillance, becoming careless about operational security. The building's security system included cameras and audio recording equipment in common areas, but Charlie's office was specifically excluded from surveillance as an executive privacy measure. However, the building's HVAC system created acoustic connections between floors that Charlie apparently didn't realize could carry conversations clearly enough for recording. I spent the remainder of the afternoon conducting what appeared to be routine safety inspections throughout the building, actually mapping the acoustic characteristics of the ventilation system and identifying optimal positions for covert recording equipment. My federal gear included miniaturized recording devices that could be positioned throughout the building without detection, creating a comprehensive surveillance network that would capture any conversations Charlie had about his criminal activities. By the time Charlie returned from his lunch meeting at the country club, I had transformed Morrison Steelworks into a surveillance zone that would document every aspect of his murder conspiracy. The prey had become the hunter, and Charlie had no idea that his perfect killing ground was now a federal evidence collection site. When Charlie stopped by my office to discuss the Henderson contract specifications for Friday evening's quality control work, I smiled and nodded enthusiastically, playing the role of the dedicated employee eager to complete an important project. Inside, I was calculating exactly how much evidence I would need to ensure that Charlie's carefully planned industrial accident became the foundation for multiple life sentences in federal prison. But as the afternoon progressed and my covert surveillance devices began capturing conversations throughout the building, I realized that Charlie's operation was far more extensive than even his basement confession had revealed. The fragmentary recordings I was collecting painted a picture of a criminal network that spanned multiple states and involved dozens of corrupt officials across various industries. Around 3 p.m., my hidden recording equipment picked up a phone conversation between Charlie and someone he addressed as Chris, discussing logistics for what they called the Pennsylvania Project. From the context, it became clear that Chris was coordinating similar operations at manufacturing facilities throughout the region, using Charlie's playbook to eliminate obstacles and acquire companies through strategically planned workplace tragedies. "The Allentown facility is perfect," Charlie was saying, his voice carrying clearly through the ventilation system from his office 2 floors above my position. "Their safety engineer has been asking questions about the correlation between equipment failures and insurance claims. Sounds familiar, doesn't it?" Chris's laugh crackled through the phone speaker. Same pattern as Toledo. How do you want to handle the timeline? Give me 2 weeks to finalize the Morrison situation. Charlie replied, after Friday, I'll have breathing room to focus on expansion. The press accident model worked perfectly in Birmingham and Detroit, should be even cleaner in Pennsylvania since their safety oversight is more relaxed. The casual way they discussed murdering safety engineers in multiple cities revealed that Charlie's operation wasn't just a local conspiracy, it was a systematic criminal enterprise that was spreading across the industrial Midwest like a cancer. Each successful murder was becoming a template for the next one, with Charlie refining his techniques and sharing them with accomplices in other markets. More chilling was the discovery that Charlie had been documenting his methods in what he called operational manuals. During a conversation with Stan later that afternoon, Charlie mentioned reviewing the press protocol handbook to ensure they didn't miss any steps in Friday's execution. They were treating murder like a manufacturing process, complete with quality control checklists and continuous improvement procedures. We've come a long way since the first accidental death in Cleveland, Stan said, and I could hear papers rustling as they reviewed their documentation. Remember how nervous we were about the timing? Now it's almost routine. Practice makes perfect, Charlie replied with disturbing satisfaction. Each facility teaches us something new about optimizing the process. The Toledo operation has been our most sophisticated yet, integrated planning, comprehensive surveillance, perfect cover stories. They discussed their learning curve like business consultants analyzing operational efficiency. Cleveland had apparently been their first experiment, where they'd learned the importance of controlling accident investigations. Birmingham had taught them how to coordinate with corrupt insurance adjusters. Detroit had shown them the value of infiltrating union leadership to prevent worker organizing against unsafe conditions. Each murdered safety engineer, each eliminated whistleblower, each silenced union representative had contributed to Charlie's growing expertise in corporate serial killing. They weren't just committing crimes. They were systematically perfecting a business model based on murder disguised as industrial accidents. The scope of their network was staggering. My recordings captured references to accomplices in insurance companies, OSHA regional offices, local police departments, and even federal agencies responsible for workplace safety oversight. Charlie had spent years cultivating relationships with corrupt officials who would ensure that his accidents were investigated superficially and closed quickly. Tony Kellerman, the night supervisor who was supposed to discover my body Friday evening, was apparently unaware of his role in the conspiracy. But my surveillance revealed that several other Morrison Steelworks employees were active participants. The human resources manager who'd processed the paperwork for workers who'd died in accidents, the accounting supervisor who handled insurance claims, even the company's medical officer who conducted post-accident health screenings for traumatized employees. Charlie had built a comprehensive support system that controlled every aspect of the workplace murder process, from victim selection through post-incident cover-up. No detail was left to chance, because Charlie understood that serial killing at an industrial scale required the same systematic approach that made Morrison Steelworks successful in legitimate manufacturing. The financial scope was equally shocking. My afternoon surveillance captured Charlie discussing profit margins for their acquisition projects with someone he identified as their investment coordinator. The insurance payouts from worker deaths were being pooled with acquisition profits to fund expansion into new markets. Murder wasn't just Charlie's hobby, it was the foundation of a growing business empire. The Toledo model is generating about $3.2 million per acquisition cycle, Charlie explained during one recorded conversation. Factor in the insurance settlements from worker incidents, and we're looking at 400% return on operational investment. Pennsylvania should be even more profitable given the lower labor costs and reduced regulatory oversight. They were calculating return on investment for human lives, treating murder as a profit center in their business model. Each dead worker represented quantifiable value in their spreadsheets. Each eliminated safety engineer was a line item contributing to their expansion budget. The revelation that crystallized the true horror of Charlie's operation came during a late afternoon call with someone identified only as the coordinator. This person was apparently managing similar operations across multiple industries, not just manufacturing but construction, mining, chemical processing, and transportation. Charlie's model was being replicated throughout the industrial economy by a network of corrupt executives who'd learned to weaponize workplace safety regulations. The beauty of the industrial accident approach, the coordinator was explaining, is scalability. Every sector has inherent hazards that provide plausible cover for elimination operations. Manufacturing gives us hydraulic presses and conveyor systems. Construction offers crane accidents and fall hazards. Chemical processing provides explosion and toxic exposure possibilities. They had turned the entire American industrial infrastructure into a murder weapon, using the legitimate dangers of blue-collar work to hide systematic assassinations of anyone who threatened their profits. Safety engineers, union organizers, regulatory inspectors, whistleblowing employees, all of them had become targets in an industrial killing machine disguised as normal business operations. The scope of the conspiracy was so vast that I began to understand why my routine Department of Labor investigation had stumbled into something this significant. Charlie's network wasn't just violating workplace safety regulations. They were conducting industrial terrorism on a scale that threatened the entire foundation of worker protection in America. As the workday ended, and I prepared to leave Morrison Steelworks for what might be the last time as an undercover agent, I realized that Friday's confrontation wouldn't just be about saving my own life. It would be about exposing a criminal conspiracy that had turned American manufacturing into a hunting ground for corporate serial killers. But audio recordings and pattern documentation wouldn't be sufficient to bring down a network this sophisticated. I needed access to Charlie's digital files, financial records, and communication logs. The kind of evidence that would survive aggressive legal challenges and convince federal prosecutors that they were dealing with organized criminal enterprise rather than isolated incidents. That evening, I returned to my apartment in downtown Toledo and activated the secure communication protocols that would connect me directly to Supervisory Special Agent Louisa Hendricks. The conversation I was about to have would transform my routine safety compliance investigation into a federal task force operation targeting what appeared to be the largest industrial terrorism conspiracy in American history. Louisa's voice carried through the encrypted connection with the crisp professionalism that had made her one of the Department of Labor's most effective supervisors. Agent Parker, your coded messages suggest we're dealing with something significantly beyond the original scope of your assignment. The original allegations were just the surface layer, I replied, settling into the secure workspace I'd established in my apartment's second bedroom. Charlie Morrison isn't just cutting safety corners to save money. He's systematically murdering workers and safety officials to facilitate corporate acquisitions across multiple states. The silence on the secure line stretched for nearly 30 seconds before Louisa responded. That's a serious escalation from workplace safety violations. What evidence do you have to support criminal conspiracy charges? I spent the next hour briefing Louisa on everything I'd discovered, from the basement conversation that revealed my planned murder, to the surveillance recordings that exposed a multi-state network of corrupt officials. By the time I'd finished outlining the scope of Charlie's operation, Louisa was already coordinating with federal agencies across 3 states. This goes beyond Department of Labor jurisdiction, Louisa explained, her voice taking on the focused intensity that indicated she was simultaneously managing multiple communication channels. I'm bringing in FBI Criminal Investigation Division, ATF, for the industrial explosives angle, and Treasury Department for the financial crimes component. Within 2 hours, my apartment had been transformed into a federal command center. Louisa arrived with a technical team that installed sophisticated surveillance equipment, secure communication systems, and evidence analysis capabilities that would support a complex undercover operation. The woman who'd entered Morrison Steelworks as a junior safety engineer was now the central figure in a federal investigation targeting industrial terrorism. The technical team leader, a soft-spoken specialist named Annalise Chen, explained the advanced capabilities they were deploying. We're establishing real-time monitoring of all communications within a 5-mile radius of Morrison Steelworks. Every phone call, email, text message, and radio transmission will be captured and analyzed for connections to Charlie's network. More importantly, Annalise's team had brought equipment that would allow me to access Charlie's computer systems without leaving any trace of intrusion. The target's office security is sophisticated but not government-grade, she explained while setting up the digital infiltration tools. We'll be able to penetrate his entire network and copy everything without triggering any alerts. The plan was audacious in its scope. While I maintained my cover as Evelyn Parker, the naive safety engineer scheduled for murder Friday evening, federal agents would be conducting comprehensive surveillance of Charlie's entire operation. Every conversation, every digital communication, every financial transaction would be documented in real time as evidence for what would become one of the largest criminal conspiracy prosecutions in industrial history. But first we needed complete access to Charlie's files, and that meant physical infiltration of Morrison Steelworks during the overnight hours when the building would be largely empty. My 18 months as an employee had given me intimate knowledge of the security systems, guard rotations, and access protocols that would allow federal agents to penetrate the facility without detection. At 2 a.m. Thursday morning, I led a team of 3 federal specialists through the loading dock entrance that Charlie had shown me during my first-week orientation tour. The same access point that was supposed to demonstrate Morrison Steelworks' commitment to security protocols was about to become the entry point for a federal evidence-gathering operation. Charlie's office occupied the entire top floor of the administration building, a testament to his success in building Morrison Steelworks into a regional manufacturing powerhouse. What he didn't realize was that his corporate empire was about to become the evidence that would send him to federal prison for multiple life sentences. Annalise's technical skills were immediately apparent as she bypassed Charlie's computer security in less than 10 minutes. "He's using military-grade encryption for some files," she murmured while her fingers flew across the keyboard, "but the access protocols are commercial standard. Probably assumes his physical security is sufficient protection." The digital treasure trove we discovered exceeded even my most optimistic expectations. Charlie had documented every aspect of his operation with the same meticulous attention to detail that had made Morrison Steelworks successful in legitimate manufacturing. Financial records showing insurance payouts from worker deaths, communication logs with corrupt officials across multiple states, detailed planning documents for future murders disguised as workplace accidents. Most damning were the operational manuals that Charlie had created for his expanding network. Complete technical specifications for sabotaging different types of industrial equipment, psychological profiles of typical safety engineers and how to manipulate them. Even instruction guides for recruiting corrupt officials in regulatory agencies and insurance companies. "This isn't just criminal conspiracy," Louisa whispered as she reviewed the files on Charlie's private server. "This is domestic terrorism using industrial infrastructure as the weapon delivery system." The financial records revealed the true scope of Charlie's empire. Over the past 5 years, his network had generated over $40 million through insurance fraud and acquisition profits derived from strategically planned worker deaths. The money was being laundered through legitimate business investments and used to expand operations into new markets across the industrial Midwest. But the most chilling discovery was Charlie's victim database, detailed files on hundreds of workers, safety engineers, union organizers, and regulatory officials who'd been identified as threats to the network's operations. Some files were marked resolved, with dates corresponding to workplace accidents that had been reported in local newspapers. Others were marked active with specific timelines for elimination. My own file was extensive, documenting 18 months of surveillance and analysis. Charlie had been studying my routines, my professional background, my personal relationships, even my apartment building's security systems. Every aspect of my life had been cataloged and analyzed to support his murder planning. More disturbing were the files on other federal agents. Charlie's network had identified at least 6 undercover investigators across different agencies, apparently through their infiltration of federal personnel databases. Some of these agents were marked as eliminated through what appeared to be carefully planned accidents. "We're not just dealing with corporate crime," I realized as the scope of the conspiracy became clear. Charlie's network has been systematically murdering federal agents for years. This is an attack on the entire regulatory system that protects American workers. The evidence we extracted that night would form the foundation for what federal prosecutors would later describe as the most comprehensive industrial terrorism case in American legal history. But first, we had to survive Friday evening's confrontation and ensure that Charlie's planned murder became the final piece of evidence that would destroy his entire network. Thursday morning arrived with deceptive normalcy. I woke in my apartment knowing that federal agents were positioned throughout Toledo, monitoring every aspect of Charlie's operation while I prepared for what would be my final performance as the naive safety engineer. The woman who walked into Morrison Steelworks that morning carried herself with the same professional demeanor that had characterized Evelyn Parker for 18 months, but underneath the familiar facade was a federal agent preparing to spring the most sophisticated trap in industrial law enforcement history. Charlie was already at his desk when I arrived, reviewing what appeared to be routine production schedules but were probably final preparations for my murder. His greeting carried the same warmth that had characterized our professional relationship throughout my tenure at Morrison Steelworks, the performance of a caring mentor who happened to be planning my death in less than 30 hours. "Morning, Evelyn," he said, looking up from his computer with the smile that had once seemed genuine but now appeared coldly calculated. "Ready for the final push on the Henderson contract? I know it's been a challenging week, but your attention to detail on this project has been exceptional." "Absolutely," I replied, settling into the chair across from his desk with the enthusiasm that Charlie expected from his dedicated employee. "I've reviewed all the quality control specifications, and I'm confident we can complete the titanium component testing by Friday evening. The press setup in Section C should be perfect for the precision measurements we need." Charlie's eyes glinted with what I now recognized as predatory satisfaction. He was enjoying the irony of discussing my murder while I remained oblivious to his intentions. "That's exactly the kind of commitment that makes Morrison Steelworks successful. Your willingness to work late hours to meet client deadlines shows real dedication to the company." The conversation continued for 20 minutes, covering production schedules, quality standards, and deadline requirements that provided perfect cover for Charlie's final preparations. Every word was being recorded by federal surveillance equipment, building the evidentiary foundation that would demonstrate premeditation and conspiracy in what prosecutors would argue was attempted murder of a federal agent. But maintaining my cover required more than just professional conversations with Charlie. I had to continue interacting normally with every employee at Morrison Steelworks, including Stan Rodriguez and the other accomplices who were actively planning my death. The psychological strain of smiling and making small talk with people who intended to kill me was unlike anything my federal training had prepared me for. Stan appeared in my office around 10 a.m., ostensibly to discuss maintenance schedules for the Section C equipment, but actually to coordinate final details for Friday evening's murder. His nervous energy was more pronounced than usual, probably reflecting the stress of preparing to commit premeditated murder against someone he'd worked with professionally for over a year. "Just wanted to confirm the timeline for your Henderson contract work tomorrow," Stan said, consulting a clipboard that probably contained my execution schedule disguised as routine maintenance documentation. "I'll be running some calibration tests on the press systems around 6 p.m., so you'll want to wait until after 7 to start your quality control procedures." "That works perfectly," I replied, knowing that Stan was actually informing me when he'd complete the sabotage that was supposed to ensure my death. I was planning to start around 7:30 anyway, so the timing shouldn't be a problem. Stan nodded with the satisfaction of someone whose careful planning was proceeding smoothly. He had no idea that federal agents were monitoring every aspect of his preparation, documenting each step of the conspiracy that would send him to prison for attempted murder of a federal officer. The most challenging aspect of my performance was managing interactions with Tony Kellerman, the night supervisor who was unwittingly scheduled to discover my body. Tony was a decent man whose primary concern was maintaining workplace safety, and his genuine care for employee welfare made him the perfect unwitting accomplice for Charlie's plan. "You sure you're comfortable working alone in Section C tomorrow evening?" Tony asked during our routine safety briefing, his grandfatherly concern evident in his voice. "That equipment can be tricky, especially when you're focused on precision measurements. I'll be extra careful," I assured him, maintaining the slight nervousness that Evelyn Parker would naturally feel about working with dangerous machinery. "The Henderson contract specifications are pretty detailed, so I'll probably be moving slowly anyway." Tony's relief was visible as he checked off items on his safety inspection list. He genuinely believed he was looking out for my welfare, never suspecting that Charlie had positioned him to play a crucial role in what was supposed to be my murder. The thought of this kind man discovering what he believed was my accidentally mangled body filled me with rage toward Charlie's casual cruelty. Throughout Thursday afternoon, I maintained my routine inspections and documentation while federal agents positioned themselves throughout Morrison Steel Works. Annalise's technical team had installed surveillance equipment that would capture every aspect of Friday evening's confrontation, ensuring that Charlie's attempted murder would be documented from multiple angles with audio and video evidence that would survive any legal challenge. By Thursday evening, all the pieces were in place for what would become the largest industrial terrorism arrest in American history. Charlie Morrison thought he was finalizing plans for the perfect murder disguised as a workplace accident. Instead, he was walking into a federal trap that would expose his entire network and send him to prison for multiple life sentences. The prey had become the predator, and Charlie had no idea that his carefully planned industrial accident was about to become his complete destruction. Friday morning dawned gray and humid, the kind of oppressive weather that made everything feel ominous. I arrived at Morrison Steel Works at my usual time, carrying myself with the same professional demeanor that had characterized my 18 months as Evelyn Parker, but underneath the familiar routine was a federal agent preparing for the most dangerous operation of her career. The building felt different, knowing that federal agents were positioned throughout the facility and surrounding area. Annalise's surveillance team had transformed Morrison Steel Works into the most comprehensively monitored industrial site in Ohio, with hidden cameras, audio recording equipment, and real-time communication systems that would document every aspect of Charlie's attempted murder. But the technical challenge was extraordinary. We needed to capture Charlie and Stan in the act of attempted murder while ensuring my safety and maintaining the integrity of evidence that would hold up in federal court. One mistake in timing or positioning could result in my death or the collapse of a case that had taken months to develop. Louisa's voice crackled through the nearly invisible earpiece that connected me to the Federal Command Center established in a surveillance van parked 3 blocks from Morrison Steel Works. All surveillance positions are confirmed operational. We have visual and audio coverage of every approach to Section C, plus backup teams positioned throughout the building. The morning passed with excruciating normalcy as Charlie and Stan made their final preparations for what they believed would be the perfect murder. My hidden recording equipment captured their casual conversations about technical details, timeline coordination, and post-incident procedures that revealed the systematic nature of their planning. Around 10 a.m., I overheard Charlie talking with someone he identified as their cleanup coordinator about evidence removal procedures. Standard protocol after the incident, Charlie was saying, his voice carrying through the ventilation system that had become our primary surveillance channel. Any personal items that might raise questions need to disappear before OSHA arrives. The cleanup coordinator's response chilled me to the bone. Same approach as Birmingham and Detroit. Personal electronics, notebooks, anything that shows pattern recognition or investigation activity. We'll stage it as normal post-accident evidence collection. They had developed systematic procedures for covering up their murders, removing any evidence that might suggest their victims had been investigating safety violations or asking inconvenient questions. My federal investigation files, my personal computer, even my apartment would have been sanitized to support their narrative of a tragic workplace accident. But what Charlie didn't realize was that federal agents were monitoring every aspect of his cleanup operation. The people he thought were his accomplices in evidence destruction were actually federal investigators documenting his criminal conspiracy. Every instruction he gave about covering up my murder was being recorded as evidence of premeditation and obstruction of justice. Stan's activities throughout Friday morning were particularly revealing. My surveillance equipment captured him conducting what appeared to be routine maintenance on the Section C hydraulic press, but his actions were actually the final steps in weaponizing the machinery for my murder. He removed safety guards, disabled emergency stop circuits, and modified the programmable logic controller that governed the press operation. Most disturbing was the casual professionalism with which Stan approached his preparation for murder. He worked with the same methodical attention to detail that characterized his legitimate maintenance duties, checking and double-checking each modification to ensure that the press would function exactly as Charlie's plan required. Light curtain response time, now 3.7 seconds, Stan reported to Charlie during a lunch break conversation that my surveillance captured. Emergency stop circuits show the same delay. Press cycle time is 4.2 seconds, so the window is perfect. They were discussing the technical specifications of my death with the same clinical precision they'd use for any industrial process. The hydraulic press that was supposed to crush me had been transformed into a precisely calibrated murder weapon, disguised as equipment suffering from routine maintenance issues. The afternoon brought increasingly frequent communication between Charlie and his network of accomplices across multiple states. My surveillance equipment captured references to similar operations being prepared in Pennsylvania, Michigan, and Indiana, suggesting that my murder was just one element of a coordinated national campaign against federal investigators and safety officials. After tonight, we'll have a 2-week window to implement the Allentown project, Charlie explained during a conference call with his regional coordinators. The Parker elimination removes our biggest immediate threat, and the accident will reinforce the industrial safety narrative for other facilities. They were treating my death as a strategic operation that would enable expanded criminal activities across the industrial Midwest. My murder wasn't just about silencing one inconvenient investigator, it was about sending a message to other federal agents and safety officials that asking too many questions about workplace accidents could be deadly. As the workday progressed toward evening, I could feel the tension building throughout Morrison Steel Works. Charlie's nervous energy was more pronounced than usual. Stan was making frequent trips to Section C to verify his sabotage work, and even uninvolved employees seemed to sense that something significant was happening. Tony Kellerman approached me around 4 p.m. for what he believed was a routine safety discussion but was actually his final briefing before unknowingly participating in Charlie's murder plan. "You're sure you're comfortable with the evening work schedule?" he asked, consulting his clipboard with genuine concern for my welfare. "Everything should be straightforward," I assured him, maintaining the slight nervousness that Evelyn Parker would naturally feel about working alone with dangerous machinery. "I've reviewed all the safety protocols and the Henderson contract specifications are pretty clear about the testing procedures." Tony nodded, satisfied that he'd fulfilled his supervisory responsibilities. He had no idea that Charlie had positioned him to discover what was supposed to be my accidentally mangled body, traumatizing a decent man to provide authenticity to a carefully staged crime scene. By 6 p.m., all the pieces were in position for what would become the most comprehensively documented attempted murder in federal law enforcement history. Charlie Morrison thought he was implementing the perfect plan to eliminate a troublesome employee. Instead, he was about to trigger a federal operation that would destroy his entire criminal network. But as the evening shift began and most employees departed for the weekend, my surveillance equipment captured conversations that revealed the true scope of Charlie's operation. What we'd uncovered wasn't just a regional conspiracy, it was a national network of industrial terrorists who'd been systematically murdering federal agents, safety officials, and whistleblowers for over a decade. The revelation began with a conference call that Charlie initiated from his office at exactly 6:15 p.m. My recording equipment captured his voice with perfect clarity as he addressed what appeared to be coordinators from across the industrial United States. "Gentlemen, tonight marks the completion of Phase 3 operations in the Ohio sector," Charlie announced with the satisfaction of a CEO reporting quarterly earnings. "The Parker elimination will neutralize our most significant regulatory threat and clear the way for accelerated expansion into Pennsylvania and Indiana markets." The responses from various regional coordinators painted a picture of criminal activity that extended far beyond anything we'd suspected. References to similar operations in Texas petrochemical facilities, California aerospace manufacturing, North Carolina textile plants, and Michigan automotive factories revealed that Charlie's model had been replicated throughout American industrial infrastructure. "Birmingham results exceeded projections," reported someone identified as the Alabama coordinator. "The safety engineer elimination generated $43 million in acquisition opportunities, plus eliminated 3 federal investigators who were getting too close to our supply chain operations." They weren't just murdering individual threats, they were conducting systematic campaigns to eliminate entire federal investigation teams. The scope suggested that dozens of federal agents had been killed over the years through what appeared to be routine workplace accidents. More chilling was the discovery that Charlie's network had infiltrated federal agencies themselves. During the conference call, someone identified as their Washington liaison provided updates on pending OSHA investigations and Department of Labor undercover operations that posed threats to their activities. "We've identified 6 active federal investigations that could impact network operations," the liaison reported. 3 Department of Labor undercover agents, 2 FBI industrial terrorism specialists, and 1 Treasury Department financial crimes investigator. All have been flagged for immediate elimination through standard accident protocols. I realized with horror that I wasn't Charlie's only federal target. My surveillance had uncovered a systematic campaign to murder federal law enforcement officers who were investigating industrial safety violations. The network had turned workplace accidents into a weapon of war against the regulatory system that protected American workers. The financial scope was staggering. Charlie's network had generated over $400 million through insurance fraud, acquisition profits, and elimination contracts over the past decade. They weren't just criminals, they were operating a sophisticated murder-for-hire business disguised as industrial accident investigations. The beauty of the industrial accident model, Charlie explained to his coordinators, is that it provides perfect cover for large-scale elimination operations. Manufacturing deaths are expected, investigations are routine, and federal oversight is limited. We can eliminate entire investigation teams while appearing to be model corporate citizens concerned about workplace safety. But the most horrifying discovery was their target database, a comprehensive file system that tracked federal agents, safety officials, union organizers, and whistleblowers across the entire American industrial sector. The database contained detailed profiles of thousands of potential targets, complete with surveillance reports, personal information, and specific elimination timelines. My own profile was extensive, documenting 18 months of surveillance and analysis. But I was just one entry in a massive assassination list that included some of the most effective federal investigators in industrial law enforcement. Many profiles were marked eliminated with dates corresponding to workplace accidents that had been reported in newspapers across the country. The database revealed that Charlie's network had been systematically murdering federal agents for over a decade. Safety inspectors who'd died in construction accidents, labor investigators who'd been killed in mining incidents, environmental protection agents who'd died in chemical plant explosions. All of them had been targeted for elimination because their investigations threatened the network's operations. Phase 4 implementation begins next month, Charlie announced as the conference call continued. We're expanding operations into government facilities, military contractors, and federal installations. The model scales perfectly to any industrial environment where accidents are plausible. They were planning to extend their assassination campaign into military and government facilities, targeting federal investigators who were working on national security cases. The network wasn't just engaged in corporate crime, they were conducting domestic terrorism on a scale that threatened the entire federal law enforcement system. Most disturbing was their discussion of next-generation elimination techniques that would expand beyond industrial accidents. References to transportation incidents, medical emergencies, and even home invasions suggested that Charlie's network was evolving into a comprehensive assassination service that could eliminate federal threats through any plausible means. The Parker case provides the perfect template for federal agent elimination, Charlie explained with clinical satisfaction. 18 months of surveillance, comprehensive behavioral analysis, and methodical preparation. The accident will appear completely routine, and the investigation will find exactly what we want them to find. But Charlie had made one critical error in his planning. He'd revealed his entire operation to someone with the exact skills and resources needed to destroy it. Every word of his conference call was being recorded by federal surveillance equipment, building a case that would expose the largest domestic terrorism conspiracy in American history. As 7 p.m. approached and I prepared to enter Section C for my supposed final quality control work, I realized that I wasn't just fighting for my own survival. I was the key to exposing a criminal network that had been murdering federal agents for years while hiding behind the facade of industrial accident investigations. The prey had become the predator, and Charlie Morrison was about to discover that his perfect murder had become the evidence that would send his entire network to federal prison for the rest of their lives. As 7 p.m. approached, I made my way through Morrison's steel works toward Section C, knowing that every step was being monitored by federal agents positioned throughout the facility. But this wasn't just about capturing Charlie and Stan in the act of attempted murder anymore. The scope of evidence we'd gathered during the day had transformed this operation into the foundation for the largest domestic terrorism prosecution in American history. Luisa's voice crackled through my earpiece as I walked through the increasingly empty factory floor. Command Center has confirmed simultaneous raids are being prepared across 12 states. Every regional coordinator mentioned in Charlie's conference call is under surveillance, and their facilities will be hit simultaneously when you give the signal. The coordination was staggering. While I prepared to confront Charlie in Section C, federal task forces were positioning themselves outside manufacturing facilities from California to North Carolina, ready to arrest the entire network that had been murdering federal agents for over a decade. My survival would trigger the largest coordinated law enforcement operation in industrial terrorism history. But first we needed Charlie to attempt my murder on camera. The evidence we'd gathered was extensive, but federal prosecutors had insisted on capturing the actual attempted murder to eliminate any possibility of Charlie claiming that his planning documents and recorded conversations were merely hypothetical discussions or elaborate jokes. All surveillance positions report ready. Annalise's voice joined the communication channel from her technical command center. We have audio and video coverage from 16 different angles, plus real-time biometric monitoring of your vital signs. If anything goes wrong, extraction teams can reach you in less than 30 seconds. The hydraulic press that was supposed to kill me had been transformed into the most comprehensively monitored piece of industrial equipment in Ohio. Hidden cameras would capture Charlie's sabotage from multiple angles, while audio recording equipment would document any incriminating statements he made during the murder attempt. As I entered Section C, I could see that Stan had completed his sabotage work exactly as planned. The safety guards had been removed, emergency stop circuits showed the telltale signs of tampering, and the programmable logic controller displayed error codes that would provide perfect cover for the equipment malfunction that was supposed to kill me. But what Stan didn't realize was that federal agents had been monitoring every aspect of his preparation. Technical specialists had documented each step of his sabotage operation, creating a precise record of how Charlie's network transformed legitimate industrial equipment into murder weapons. Charlie appeared in Section C at exactly 7:30 p.m., carrying a clipboard and wearing the concerned expression of a safety-conscious executive checking on an employee working alone with dangerous machinery. His performance was perfect, the caring boss ensuring that proper protocols were being followed for a critical client project. "Everything going smoothly with the Henderson contract testing?" Charlie asked, his voice carrying the paternal concern that had once seemed genuine but now sounded coldly calculated. "The press setup looks good, but you know how particular these titanium specifications can be." "The measurements are going perfectly," I replied, maintaining the enthusiasm that Evelyn Parker would show for successfully completing a challenging project. "The press calibration seems spot on, and the material samples are showing exactly the precision we need for the client's specifications." Charlie's satisfaction was visible as he watched me position titanium samples in the presswork envelope, knowing that his sabotage would ensure that my next interaction with the machinery would be fatal. He was enjoying the final moments of what he believed was the perfect murder, savoring the irony of discussing safety protocols while planning to kill me with deliberately unsafe equipment. "Just remember to follow proper procedures," Charlie advised with mock concern. "Keep your hands clear of the work envelope during press operation, and make sure the safety systems are responding properly. We can't be too careful with equipment this powerful." The casual way he discussed safety while knowing he'd disabled every protection system revealed the true depth of his sociopathy. Charlie had spent years refining his ability to appear genuinely concerned about worker welfare, while systematically murdering anyone who posed a threat to his operations. Stan joined us in Section C around 7:45 p.m., ostensibly to check on his maintenance work but actually to ensure that his sabotage was functioning properly. His nervous energy was more pronounced than usual, probably reflecting the stress of preparing to watch someone die in machinery he deliberately modified for murder. "Press systems are running smoothly," Stan reported to Charlie, consulting his clipboard with the professional demeanor that disguised his role as an accomplice to premeditated murder. "All calibrations are within normal parameters, and the safety systems show standard operational status." It was a perfect lie. Stan knew exactly what his sabotage had done to the safety systems, but his report provided Charlie with plausible documentation that the equipment had been properly maintained according to Morrison Steelworks safety protocols. The conversation continued for 15 minutes, covering technical specifications, quality requirements, and safety procedures that created perfect cover for Charlie's final preparations. Every word was being recorded by federal surveillance equipment, building the evidentiary foundation that would demonstrate premeditation and conspiracy in the attempted murder of a federal agent. But Charlie had made one critical miscalculation. He thought he was implementing a murder plan against an unsuspecting victim. Instead, he was walking into a federal trap that had been designed to capture not just his attempted murder, but the evidence needed to destroy his entire national network. As Charlie and Stan prepared to leave Section C, positioning themselves to watch my supposed death from a safe distance, federal agents throughout the building were receiving final coordination signals. The moment Charlie's sabotaged equipment attempted to kill me would trigger simultaneous arrests across 12 states, exposing the largest industrial terrorism conspiracy in American history. The hunter had revealed himself completely, not realizing that his prey was the federal agent who would bring down his entire criminal empire. As Charlie and Stan positioned themselves in the observation area overlooking Section C, apparently to watch my murder from a safe distance, federal agents across the United States were receiving final coordination signals for what would become the largest simultaneous law enforcement operation in industrial terrorism history. Louisa's voice carried through my earpiece with updates from the National Command Center that had been established in Washington, D.C. to coordinate the multi-agency response. 12 federal task forces are in position across target facilities in California, Texas, Pennsylvania, Michigan, Indiana, Alabama, North Carolina, Florida, Nevada, Colorado, Washington, and Ohio. All teams report ready for simultaneous execution. The scope of the operation was unprecedented. While Charlie prepared to watch what he believed would be my death in Toledo, FBI assault teams were surrounding manufacturing facilities from Los Angeles to Charlotte, ready to arrest regional coordinators who'd been systematically murdering federal agents for over a decade. But the coordination extended beyond simple arrests. Treasury Department specialists were positioned to freeze financial assets across multiple states, preventing Charlie's network from moving the hundreds of millions of dollars they'd generated through murder and fraud. Securities and Exchange Commission investigators were ready to seize corporate assets and halt trading in companies that had been acquired through strategically planned workplace homicides. ATF teams are standing by at suspected weapons manufacturing facilities. Annalise reported from her technical command center. Intelligence suggests the network has been modifying industrial equipment specifically for assassination purposes, creating weapons that appear to be routine manufacturing machinery. The revelation that Charlie's network had been systematically weaponizing American industrial infrastructure added another layer of federal charges to what was already the largest domestic terrorism case in modern history. They hadn't just been murdering individual threats. They'd been conducting systematic warfare against the regulatory agencies that protected American workers. Department of Homeland Security coordinators were managing the operation's national security implications, particularly the discovery that Charlie's network had infiltrated federal agencies and was targeting investigators working on classified projects related to military contractors and government facilities. Washington liaison has been identified as Deputy Assistant Administrator Rebecca Walsh from OSHA headquarters, Louisa reported, her voice carrying the gravity of someone who understood the implications of federal agency infiltration. She's been providing real-time intelligence on undercover operations to assassination targets for over 5 years. The corruption extended into the highest levels of workplace safety oversight, revealing that Charlie's network had essentially captured the regulatory system, designed to prevent exactly the kind of crimes they were committing. Federal agents tasked with protecting workers had been systematically eliminated by corrupt officials within their own agencies. But the most chilling coordination involved international connections. Communication intercepts had revealed that Charlie's model was being exported to manufacturing facilities in Mexico, Canada, and overseas locations where American companies operated production facilities. Industrial terrorism was becoming a global business model for eliminating regulatory oversight and worker protection. Interpol has been notified and is coordinating with law enforcement agencies in 43 countries where network operations have been identified, Louisa continued. This isn't just domestic terrorism. It's an international conspiracy that threatens industrial safety standards worldwide. As 8 p.m. approached and Charlie prepared to trigger what he believed would be my death, federal prosecutors were finalizing charges that would seek life sentences without parole for every member of the network. The evidence we'd gathered demonstrated systematic murder of federal agents, which carried the death penalty under federal terrorism statutes. Justice Department has confirmed that Attorney General authorization has been granted for capital charges against all principal conspirators, Louisa reported. Charlie Morrison and his regional coordinators will face the death penalty for systematic murder of federal law enforcement officers. The legal framework was unprecedented. Federal prosecutors were treating Charlie's network as an enemy combatant organization that had declared war against the United States government by systematically assassinating federal agents. The industrial terrorism charges carried penalties typically reserved for foreign terrorists and enemy agents. But beyond the legal implications, the operation would trigger systematic reforms in industrial safety oversight that would prevent similar conspiracies from developing in the future. New protocols for federal agent protection, enhanced surveillance of manufacturing facilities, and improved coordination between regulatory agencies would ensure that Charlie's model could never be replicated. Congressional leadership has been briefed and emergency hearings are being scheduled, Louisa continued. This case will result in the most comprehensive industrial safety legislation since the Occupational Safety and Health Act was created in 1970. Charlie Morrison thought he was implementing a local murder to eliminate one troublesome safety engineer. Instead, he was about to trigger a complete transformation of American industrial oversight that would protect workers and federal agents from similar threats for generations to come. As the digital clock in Section C showed 8:05 p.m., Charlie and Stan took their positions to observe what they believed would be my death. Charlie's hand moved toward his phone, probably to coordinate with the cleanup team that was supposed to sanitize the crime scene before OSHA investigators arrived. But what Charlie didn't realize was that his phone call would be the signal for federal agents across the United States to begin simultaneous arrests of his entire network. The moment he attempted to coordinate my murder would trigger the largest law enforcement operation in industrial terrorism history. All teams standing by, Louisa's voice crackled through my earpiece. On your signal, we execute simultaneous arrests across 12 states. Charlie Morrison's industrial terrorism network ends tonight. The prey was about to become the predator, and Charlie Morrison was about to discover that his perfect murder had become the evidence that would destroy the largest domestic terrorism conspiracy in American history. At exactly 8:10 p.m., Charlie pulled out his phone and began making what he believed were coordination calls for my murder cleanup. But every number he dialed connected him to federal agents who'd been monitoring his network for the past 48 hours, documenting his final preparations while building an unassailable case for terrorism charges. "Cleanup team, this is Morrison," Charlie said into his phone, his voice carrying the clinical efficiency that characterized all his criminal communications. "Parker elimination proceeds in 5 minutes. Standard protocol for evidence sanitization and witness management." What Charlie didn't realize was that the person responding to his call was FBI Special Agent Marcus Webb, who'd been impersonating his cleanup coordinator since Thursday morning. Every instruction Charlie gave about covering up my murder was being recorded as evidence of conspiracy and obstruction of justice. "Copy that, Morrison," Agent Webb replied in the flat tone that Charlie's actual cleanup coordinator typically used. "Teams are positioned for immediate post-incident response. Estimated cleanup completion in 90 minutes. From my position at the hydraulic press, I could see Charlie's satisfaction as he received confirmation that his murder plan was proceeding exactly as scheduled. He had no idea that his cleanup team had been replaced by federal agents who were documenting every aspect of his criminal conspiracy. Stan's nervous energy was becoming more pronounced as the moment approached for him to watch someone die in machinery he'd deliberately sabotaged. His hands were shaking slightly as he checked his watch and consulted his maintenance clipboard, probably reviewing the timeline that was supposed to ensure my death appeared to be a routine industrial accident. "Press cycle initiation in 60 seconds, Stan called out to Charlie, his voice carrying forced professionalism over obvious stress. "Safety system delays are calibrated for optimal timing. Emergency response protocols are confirmed with Night Supervisor." They were conducting my murder with the same systematic efficiency they'd used for their legitimate manufacturing operations. Every detail had been planned and rehearsed, every contingency had been anticipated, every witness had been positioned to support their narrative of tragic workplace accident. But what they didn't anticipate was that their victim was a federal agent who'd been coordinating with law enforcement agencies across the United States to document their entire criminal enterprise. While Charlie and Stan prepared to watch my death, federal task forces were positioning themselves to arrest their entire network simultaneously. Tony Kellerman appeared in Section C at exactly 8:12 p.m., right on schedule for his unwitting role in Charlie's murder plan. His genuine concern for my safety made him the perfect witness to discover what was supposed to be my accidentally mangled body. Everything proceeding smoothly with the Henderson contract testing, Tony asked, consulting his supervisor checklist with the conscientious attention to detail that had made him a valued employee for over 20 years. These titanium specifications can be tricky, so don't hesitate to call if you need any assistance. The measurements are going perfectly, I replied, maintaining the professional focus that Evelyn Parker would show during critical quality control work. The press calibration seems ideal for the precision requirements, and I should have the final samples completed within the next few minutes. Tony nodded with satisfaction, believing he was fulfilling his supervisory responsibilities for employee safety. He had no idea that Charlie had positioned him to provide authenticity to a carefully staged crime scene by traumatizing a decent man with the discovery of what appeared to be a tragic workplace accident. Charlie's phone buzzed with what appeared to be updates from various members of his network but were actually communications from federal agents who'd infiltrated his entire operation. Each confirmation he received about readiness and positioning was building the evidentiary foundation for his prosecution on terrorism charges. Regional coordinators confirm Phase 4 implementation readiness, Charlie murmured to Stan as he reviewed his phone messages. Pennsylvania, Indiana, and Michigan operations proceed as scheduled following successful Parker elimination. They were treating my murder as the trigger for expanded assassination operations across the industrial Midwest. My death was supposed to provide the template for murdering federal agents in multiple states, spreading Charlie's model throughout American manufacturing infrastructure. But Charlie's confidence was about to become his complete destruction. While he prepared to watch what he believed would be my death, federal agents were receiving final authorization for an operation that would expose his network as the largest domestic terrorism conspiracy in modern American history. All federal task forces report final positioning complete. Luisa's voice crackled through my earpiece. Simultaneous arrests authorized on your signal. 47 arrest warrants are ready for execution across 12 states. The moment had arrived. Charlie Morrison thought he was implementing the perfect murder that would eliminate a troublesome safety engineer and clear the way for expanded criminal operations. Instead, he was about to trigger a federal response that would destroy his entire network and send him to death row for systematic assassination of federal agents. As the digital clock in Section C showed 8:14 p.m., I positioned myself at the hydraulic press that was supposed to kill me, knowing that Charlie's sabotage would be captured on camera from 16 different angles. The attempted murder of a federal agent would become the final piece of evidence needed to convict Charlie's entire network of domestic terrorism. Charlie raised his hand to signal Stan that the murder should proceed, not realizing that his gesture was being transmitted to federal command centers across the United States as the authorization to begin the largest law enforcement operation in industrial terrorism history. The hunter was about to become the hunted, and Charlie Morrison's perfect crime was about to become his complete downfall. At exactly 8:15 p.m., I reached toward the hydraulic presswork envelope as if to adjust the positioning of a titanium sample, triggering the motion sensors that would activate Charlie's sabotaged safety systems. The light curtain beam broke as expected, but instead of the immediate press shutdown that should have protected me, Stan's modifications created the deadly 3-second delay that was supposed to ensure my death. But what Charlie and Stan didn't realize was that federal agents had been monitoring their sabotage work since Thursday evening. Technical specialists had documented every modification Stan made to the safety systems, allowing them to develop countermeasures that would protect me while preserving the evidence needed to prove attempted murder. The press began its lethal descent exactly as Charlie had planned, but hidden hydraulic overrides installed by federal technicians immediately halted the machinery before it could cause any injury. From Charlie and Stan's observation position, it appeared that I'd successfully triggered the safety systems and narrowly avoided what looked like a dangerous equipment malfunction. System malfunction, I called out, stepping back from the press with the startled reaction that Evelyn Parker would show after a close call with dangerous machinery. The safety curtain didn't respond properly. The press started cycling even though I was in the work envelope. Charlie's expression shifted from anticipation to confusion as he realized his murder weapon hadn't functioned as planned. Stan's face went white as he saw the press halt safely instead of completing the cycle that was supposed to crush me to death. "That's impossible," Stan muttered under his breath, his engineering knowledge telling him that his sabotage should have created a lethal 3-second window. The safety delays were calibrated precisely. The press cycle should have completed before the stop command executed. But before Charlie could respond to the apparent failure of his murder attempt, the loading dock doors of Morrison Steelworks burst open and federal agents poured into Section C with weapons drawn. The facility that Charlie thought was his private killing ground had been transformed into a federal crime scene with comprehensive surveillance and overwhelming tactical response. "FBI, Charlie Morrison and Stan Rodriguez, you are under arrest for attempted murder of a federal agent." Agent Marcus Webb's voice echoed through Section C as tactical teams surrounded the observation area where Charlie and Stan had positioned themselves to watch my death. Charlie's face went through a series of expressions: confusion, recognition, and finally pure terror as he realized the scope of what was happening. The woman he'd planned to murder was calmly stepping away from the press machinery, removing hidden recording equipment and revealing the federal agent's badge that had been concealed beneath her safety engineer coveralls. "What the hell is going on?" Charlie demanded, his voice cracking with the stress of seeing his perfect plan collapse into federal arrest. "Evelyn, what are you doing with those people?" "My name is Special Agent Evelyn Parker, Department of Labor, Office of Inspector General," I replied, walking toward Charlie with the calm professionalism that 18 months of federal training had ingrained. "You are under arrest for conspiracy to commit murder, attempted murder of a federal agent, domestic terrorism, and racketeering conspiracy." Stan's legs gave out completely as the full reality hit him. He'd been preparing to watch someone die in machinery he'd sabotaged, never realizing that he was walking into a federal trap that had been months in the making. "You've been investigating us this entire time," Charlie said, his business executive persona crumbling as he understood that everything he'd built was about to be destroyed. 18 months of surveillance, building evidence, documenting our operations. Every conversation, every phone call, every email, every financial transaction, I confirmed as Agent Webb approached Charlie with handcuffs. "Your entire network has been under federal surveillance for the past week. While you were planning my murder, we were coordinating the largest industrial terrorism arrest operation in American history." Charlie's phone began buzzing with urgent calls, probably from regional coordinators who were discovering that their facilities were being raided simultaneously across 12 states. But those calls would never be answered. Federal agents had been monitoring Charlie's communications for days, replacing his accomplices with undercover operatives who'd been documenting every aspect of the conspiracy. Simultaneous arrests are being executed at facilities in California, Texas, Pennsylvania, Michigan, Indiana, Alabama, North Carolina, Florida, Nevada, Colorado, and Washington, Agent Webb announced as he secured Charlie's hands behind his back. 47 members of your network are being arrested on federal terrorism charges as we speak." Stan was hyperventilating as agents secured him with handcuffs, the reality of life imprisonment for attempted murder of a federal agent overwhelming his ability to process what was happening. "I just did maintenance work," he gasped, between labored breaths. Charlie said it was routine calibration, standard safety system testing. "You systematically sabotaged industrial equipment to murder federal agents," I replied, consulting the evidence file that Annalise was handing me. "We have video documentation of every modification you made to the press safety systems, plus recordings of your conversations with Charlie about creating windows of vulnerabilities for assassination purposes." Tony Kellerman appeared in Section C, drawn by the commotion and completely bewildered by the scene of federal agents arresting his colleagues. His genuine confusion and concern confirmed that he'd been an unwitting participant in Charlie's plan, positioned to discover what was supposed to be my accidentally mangled body. "What's happening here?" Tony asked, his grandfatherly concern evident as he looked from the federal agents to Charlie and Stan in handcuffs. "Is everyone okay? Was there an equipment accident?" "Mr. Kellerman, you were scheduled to discover the scene of my murder," I explained gently, understanding that this decent man needed to process the fact that he'd been manipulated into supporting a criminal conspiracy. "Charlie Morrison has been systematically murdering workers and federal agents for years, disguising the crimes as workplace accidents." Tony's face went ashen as he realized how close he'd come to discovering what he believed was my dead body. The thought of being traumatized by Charlie's carefully staged crime scene, then unknowingly helping to cover up murder by providing witness testimony about a tragic workplace accident, left him visibly shaken. "The press malfunction," Tony said slowly, looking at the machinery that had been weaponized for murder. "That wasn't an accident, was it? Someone deliberately sabotaged the safety system." Stan Rodriguez modified the programmable logic controller to create a 3-second delay between safety system activation and press stoppage, Agent Webb explained as he guided Charlie toward the exit. "If Agent Parker had been a civilian employee, the press would have completed its cycle before the delayed stop command could save her." Charlie's expression shifted to something approaching admiration as he finally understood the sophistication of the federal operation that had destroyed his network. "You replaced my entire support system with federal agents," he said, his voice carrying grudging respect for the investigation that had outmaneuvered his criminal empire. "Your cleanup coordinator, your regional accomplices, even your Washington liaison," I confirmed. "Every person you trusted to help cover up my murder was actually a federal agent, documenting your conspiracy. Your perfect crime became the evidence that will send your entire network to death row." As federal agents escorted Charlie and Stan from Section C, I could see the full weight of his situation settling over him. The industrial empire he'd built through systematic murder was being dismantled by the same federal agencies he'd been targeting for assassination. The hunter had become the hunted, and Charlie Morrison's carefully planned workplace accident had become the foundation for the largest domestic terrorism prosecution in American history. 18 months later, I stood in the witness box of the federal courthouse in Cleveland, Ohio, looking directly at Charlie Morrison as I testified about the night he attempted to murder me using a hydraulic press he'd weaponized specifically for that purpose. He sat at the defense table in an orange federal prison jumpsuit, his expensive business suits replaced by institutional clothing that reflected his new status as a convicted domestic terrorist. The courtroom was packed with families of victims whose loved ones had been murdered by Charlie's network over the previous decade. Safety engineers, union representatives, federal agents, and whistleblowing workers who died in what appeared to be routine workplace accidents, but were actually carefully planned assassinations designed to eliminate threats to Charlie's criminal empire. Agent Parker, federal prosecutor Selma Rodriguez continued, "Please describe for the jury what happened when you triggered the motion sensor on the hydraulic press that evening in Section C." I recounted the technical details of Charlie's attempted murder, explaining how Stan's sabotage had created a 3-second delay between safety system activation and press stoppage that should have ensured my death. The jury listened with horrified attention as I described the precision engineering that had gone into weaponizing industrial equipment for assassination purposes. The evidence against Charlie and his network was overwhelming. 18 months of investigation had produced thousands of hours of recorded conversations, comprehensive financial records documenting hundreds of millions of dollars generated through murder and fraud, and detailed technical specifications for the industrial equipment that had been modified specifically for killing federal agents and safety officials. Most damning were Charlie's own operational manuals that provided step-by-step instructions for identifying targets, planning assassinations, and covering up murders through careful manipulation of workplace accident investigations. The documents revealed a criminal mind that had systematically studied federal law enforcement procedures specifically to develop countermeasures. The trial had lasted 6 months, with federal prosecutors presenting evidence of 43 murders across 12 states that had been carried out by Charlie's network over the past decade. Each victim had been someone whose work threatened the network's operations: federal agents investigating safety violations, union organizers demanding better worker protection, whistleblowing employees who'd reported criminal activity. Charlie's defense attorney had attempted various strategies to minimize his client's culpability, arguing that the network had operated independently of Charlie's direct control and that many of the murders had been carried out by regional coordinators acting on their own initiative. But the evidence clearly demonstrated Charlie's central role in planning and coordinating the assassination campaign. Mr. Morrison's communications show systematic planning and oversight of murder operations across multiple states, Prosecutor Rodriguez explained during her closing argument. He didn't just participate in this conspiracy, he created it, managed it, and expanded it into the largest domestic terrorism network in modern American history. The financial records were particularly damning, showing how insurance payouts from worker deaths had been pooled with acquisition profits to fund expansion into new markets. Charlie had turned murder into a sustainable business model, generating sufficient revenue to continue operations while expanding into new geographic areas and industry sectors. But the testimony that had the greatest impact on the jury came from Tony Kellerman, the night supervisor who'd been unknowingly positioned to discover what was supposed to be my mangled body. His description of the psychological trauma he would have suffered from finding a coworker dead in machinery that had been deliberately sabotaged revealed the calculated cruelty of Charlie's planning. Charlie Morrison didn't just plan to murder Agent Parker, Tony testified, his voice shaking with emotion as he described his unwitting role in the conspiracy. He planned to traumatize me by making me discover her body, probably calculating that my emotional reaction would add authenticity to his staged accident scene. The international scope of the conspiracy had added terrorism charges that carried the death penalty. Evidence revealed that Charlie's model had been exported to manufacturing facilities in 17 countries, creating a global network of industrial assassination operations that threatened workplace safety standards worldwide. Stan Rodriguez had cooperated with federal prosecutors in exchange for a life sentence instead of execution, providing detailed testimony about the technical methods used to weaponize industrial equipment. His engineering expertise had been crucial to the network's success, but his cooperation had also provided prosecutors with the evidence needed to convict the entire conspiracy. The defendants treated American industrial infrastructure as a weapon delivery system. Prosecutor Rodriguez explained to the jury during her final argument. They systematically murdered federal agents and safety officials using the same equipment that millions of American workers depend on for their daily livelihood. The jury deliberated for less than 8 hours before returning guilty verdicts on all terrorism charges against Charlie and his regional coordinators. The evidence had been so comprehensive, and the conspiracy so well documented that the defense had been unable to create reasonable doubt about any aspect of the prosecution's case. Charlie's expression remained impassive as the verdicts were read, but I could see his hands shaking as he realized that his criminal empire had been completely destroyed. The business executive who'd built Morrison Steel Works into a regional manufacturing powerhouse had become the domestic terrorist who would spend the rest of his life in federal maximum security prison. The sentencing hearing took place 3 weeks later, with Judge Patricia Chen delivering verdicts that reflected the unprecedented nature of the crimes. Charlie Morrison received the death penalty for systematic murder of federal agents, while his regional coordinators received life sentences without possibility of parole. The defendants conducted warfare against the regulatory system that protects American workers, Judge Chen explained as she delivered the sentences. Their crimes represent an attack on the fundamental principles of workplace safety and federal law enforcement that will not be tolerated in a civilized society. The investigation had triggered comprehensive reforms in industrial safety oversight that would prevent similar conspiracies from developing in the future, but the human cost had been staggering: 43 victims whose families would never recover from their losses. 3 years after Charlie Morrison's conviction and sentencing to death row, I stood in my office at the newly established Federal Industrial Safety Task Force headquarters in Washington, D.C., looking out at the Capitol building where Congress had passed the most comprehensive workplace protection legislation since the original Occupational Safety and Health Act of 1970. My life had been transformed in ways I could never have anticipated when I first walked into Morrison Steel Works as an undercover safety engineer. The woman who'd discovered her boss planning her murder had become the federal official responsible for preventing similar conspiracies from threatening American workers and federal agents. The Morrison Industrial Safety Act, as it became known, had fundamentally changed how workplace accidents were investigated and how federal agents were protected during undercover operations. Enhanced surveillance protocols, mandatory federal oversight of high-risk manufacturing facilities, and new criminal penalties for industrial terrorism had created a regulatory framework that made Charlie's model impossible to replicate. But beyond the legislative changes, my experience had led to a personal mission that consumed my professional life. The Federal Industrial Safety Task Force that I now directed was dedicated to identifying and preventing the kind of systematic murder conspiracy that had operated undetected for over a decade. My team consisted of specialists from across federal law enforcement, FBI agents experienced in domestic terrorism investigations, Department of Labor inspectors with deep knowledge of industrial processes, Treasury Department analysts who could track financial patterns that indicated criminal activity, and technical experts who understood how legitimate manufacturing equipment could be weaponized for assassination purposes. We'd already identified and disrupted 6 potential industrial terrorism networks in the 3 years since Charlie's arrest, preventing what intelligence analysts estimated could have been hundreds of additional murders. The techniques Charlie had developed were apparently more widespread than anyone had initially realized, with criminal networks in various industries attempting to replicate his model. The international scope of our work was equally challenging. Charlie's operational manuals had been discovered in manufacturing facilities across 4 continents, requiring coordination with law enforcement agencies in dozens of countries to prevent the global spread of industrial assassination techniques. But the most rewarding aspect of my new role was working directly with the families of Charlie's victims. The Federal Industrial Safety Victim Compensation Fund that Congress had established provided financial support for families whose loved ones had been murdered in what appeared to be workplace accidents, but the emotional healing required more personal attention. I'd become particularly close to Margaret Henderson, the elderly widow whose husband had been murdered in Charlie's Birmingham operation 3 years before my investigation began. Her husband Robert had been a safety inspector who'd discovered evidence of systematic equipment sabotage at the facility Charlie was planning to acquire. "Robert would be so proud of what you've accomplished," Margaret told me during one of our monthly dinners at her home in Birmingham. "He spent his whole career trying to protect workers from exactly the kind of dangers that Charlie Morrison was creating." The personal relationships I'd developed with victims' families had given my work emotional depth that went beyond professional obligation. Every investigation we conducted, every network we disrupted, every reform we implemented was ultimately about preventing other families from experiencing the devastation that Charlie's victims had endured. My relationship with Tony Kellerman had evolved into a professional partnership that neither of us could have anticipated. The night supervisor who'd been unwittingly positioned to discover my supposedly murdered body had become one of our most effective field investigators, using his decades of manufacturing experience to identify potential vulnerabilities in industrial facilities. "I spent 20 years thinking workplace accidents were just part of the business," Tony explained during a recent briefing on suspicious patterns we'd identified at a chemical processing facility in Texas. "Now I understand that some of those accidents were actually murders, and I want to make sure we catch the killers before they can hurt anyone else." The psychological impact of surviving Charlie's assassination attempt had required years of therapy and support that helped me process the trauma of discovering that someone I'd trusted had been systematically planning my death. Dr. Sarah Martinez, the therapist who'd specialized in helping victims of domestic violence, had guided me through the complex emotions of betrayal, survival, and transformation. "You've taken an experience that could have destroyed you and used it to protect countless other people," Dr. Martinez had observed during one of our sessions. "That kind of resilience and purpose gives meaning to trauma in ways that can be profoundly healing." The financial compensation I'd received for surviving Charlie's assassination attempt had been substantial, but I'd donated most of it to organizations that supported families of workplace violence victims and federal agents killed in the line of duty. The money felt tainted by its connection to Charlie's criminal empire, but using it to help other victims had given it positive purpose. My living situation had stabilized in ways that reflected my new sense of mission and identity. The apartment in downtown Toledo where I'd lived while undercover at Morrison Steelworks had been replaced by a secure condominium in Arlington, Virginia, where I could focus on my federal responsibilities while maintaining the privacy necessary for someone who'd become a high-profile target for industrial terrorists. Dating remained complicated by the security considerations that came with my public role in exposing industrial terrorism, but I developed meaningful relationships with other federal agents who understood the unique challenges of law enforcement work. The isolation that had characterized my undercover years had given way to professional and personal connections that provided genuine support and companionship. Most importantly, I'd found a sense of purpose that transcended personal survival and professional advancement. Every day brought opportunities to prevent other federal agents and civilian workers from experiencing what Charlie Morrison had planned for me. The prey had become the protector, and Charlie Morrison's failed assassination had become the foundation for a career dedicated to ensuring that industrial terrorism could never again hide behind the facade of workplace accidents. Every morning when I arrived at the Federal Industrial Safety Task Force headquarters, I was reminded that Charlie's attempt to silence me had instead given me a voice that would protect American workers for generations to come. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.